So today we're talking about Jesus' miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And like I said, there are different versions of this story in each gospel. So one of the things that actually you heard during the children's message mentioned was that the 5 loaves and bread actually came from a little boy. Matthew doesn't have that detail, but Luke does. And it's a neat, I like that part of the story. And since I picked the scripture this morning, I'm not sure why I didn't use the Luke version, but oh well. But we want to talk about something else first, and we got to talk a little bit about this. This is one of those stories that if we're not careful, we can go, oh, that's cute, right? Oh, he multiplied loaves and fishes. Oh, that's neat. And it makes a great Sunday school lesson and, all that kind of stuff. And as often the case, though, with the Bible, there is far more going on than we likely understand. So we kind of have to put our brains in reverse to first century Roman Empire, which of course none of us have ever been to or seen. And one of the things that was prevalent at that time was this idea of bread and circus. So if anybody seen I can't remember when it was, early aughts, Russell Crowe made a movie, Gladiator. Anybody see Gladiator? Yeah. So there's a scene in that movie where he plays a gladiator, and about this time, actually maybe a few years before the time of Jesus, and there's a scene in that movie where they're actually throwing bread into the crowd. And at one of the games that was happening. And this was something that actually happened, and it happened a lot. Because about the time that Jesus is on the scene, Rome has really stopped being a republic and has really been an empire for about a century. And one of the things that you learn very quickly if you are an emperor and want to have a successful empire is you have to keep people happy. So the question is, how do you keep people happy? Well, in this time, in this place, most people, everyday people, 90% or more of the population is involved in only one industry, and the industry is agriculture. But agriculture doesn't look the same back then as it looks today. So don't think all those trucks that are running up and down Highway 60 right now. That's not what agriculture looked like, because you had no tools, you had no machines, you had no that. If you grew something to eat it. And there wasn't a lot of leftovers, and you weren't, most people weren't selling it in markets, or some people did, but most people did not. So most people were basically what we would call today subsistence farmers. That's what they did. And what that meant was if you had a good year, then maybe you had enough to eat. If you didn't have a good year, then you probably didn't have enough to eat. So what the emperors and the other kind of ruling class people latched onto relatively quickly is if you want to keep people, basically happy and at least somewhat contented with you, it's actually a fairly straightforward process. One is because there is no Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hulu or cable TV or anything, people don't have a lot of entertainment. And 2, there is no Kroger or Safeway or anything like that. People don't have that experience of having an abundance of food. If you can give them an experience of that, not all the time, but even just once in a while, people will appreciate it. So that's basically what they did, and it's known today as bread and circus. And one of the early guys, this guy's actual name in English translates to juvenile, which I think is funny. But this is kind of a famous quote from the similar time to when Jesus was around. And he said, "Give them bread and circus and they will never revolt." Basically, as long as we give them a little bit of entertainment every once in a while and some bread every once in a while, nobody's ever going to, people won't ever, try to overthrow us because they will just be happy enough. And that may seem a little weird to us today, but what we have to remind ourselves of is these folks living in that time, really had no experience of abundance, especially like abundance of food, the way that we have an experience of abundance of food. And what I mean by that is they did not live in a world where their pantries were full and there were grocery stores, on every corner where they could get what they want whenever they wanted it. They were most of them barely getting by. So to go somewhere where you're actually going to be offered some entertainment and offered bread that is just for you and that you can have as much as you want and nobody's going to tell you you can't and nobody's going to take it away would be a really big deal. And of course, the one thing they made sure of is they knew where that bread came from. So basically, this is a world where if you want to experience abundance, you would recognize the only place abundance comes from is Caesar. That's what they wanted you to know. They wanted you to know that if you wanted to experience this idea of abundance, the only place it was going to happen was because the emperor allowed it to happen. And this was commonplace throughout the Roman Empire, including in Judea. Now, the other thing was getting access to, being able to go to the bread and the circus and go to these events and experience all this was a bit of a luxury. You still had to have some amount of ability because you had to leave your farm. You had to leave your behind. You had to have the time to go. So while it was open to everybody, not everybody could go to it. Not everybody had the opportunity to go and participate in this abundance, but everybody heard about it because if you went somewhere where there was entertainment and all the bread you could eat, people would come back and they would tell their friends because they didn't have a lot else to talk about. There were no Kardashians to discuss. Oh, the world we could live in. Anyway, so this is the world. This is the world that they live in. So this is a very common thing. So what we have here, so understanding that, what we really start to see is Jesus in the feeding of the 5,000 really is offering another version of that. But he's doing something, he's doing several things differently. So if we hear the story, it said right at the beginning, after Jesus had heard, and then he went off by himself, and then the crowd followed. Now, what's important to understand is if you look back in the scripture a little bit, you can see what just transpired in Matthew. Oh, that's right. That's why I used this version, not Luke's version. Now I remember. Okay. Because right before this, two things happen. One is Jesus goes to Nazareth and tries to be a prophet there, and they say, "You're Mary's son. We know who you are. We're not listening to you." And thus the phrase that is still common today, there's no such thing, you cannot be a prophet in your hometown, right? It's like going home. I grew up in a small town. I know this, right? It doesn't matter what I've done today. If I go home and I go visit people, I'm like, "Oh, you're Jeremy. You're Linda's kid. She used to have that bookstore, and you got that traffic ticket on that busy highway that one time." That's the person I am. It doesn't matter that was 1993. It doesn't matter, right? Because that's just the way the world works. So Jesus went back to Nazareth, had the same experience. They're like, "You're Joseph's son. You're Mary's son. We know your brothers and sisters. Don't come in here and tell us you're the son of God." And they kind of like run him out of town. So he just had that experience. The other thing that happened was with John the Baptist. So John the Baptist, is kind of like I think second cousin. I don't quite know how that works. But Jesus' mom and John the Baptist's moms were cousins, so they're second cousins, once removed. I don't know, something. They're cousins. So John was obviously the one who would go before Jesus. Well, Jesus had just gotten word that actually John the Baptist had been killed. And John the Baptist kind of meets an untimely end because of his prophetic work. So this is the word, this is the thing that Jesus just heard. Jesus was just rejected in his hometown and just heard that his cousin, the one who baptized him, had been killed. So it's no wonder that he wants to go off by himself for a little while, right? Who wouldn't? And yet, this crowd shows up and follows him. And they go to where he is, and despite everything that he no doubt is feeling and the hurt and loss that he is no doubt feeling, we are told Jesus has pity on the crowd and goes to them anyway. And he doesn't entertain them with circus. What does it say that he does? He heals them, right? He goes and he heals the sick. And in other tellings of the story, it goes that he says he goes and he teaches them, right? So he takes it as an opportunity to tell them about the good news. He tells them about the kingdom of God. He chooses to do that instead, not from a place where he is currently being exalted, not from a place of being on high, but in a place where we can imagine he's probably feeling a little bit low. And yet he has mercy on the people anyway and goes to them. The other thing is, who is it that is following Jesus? Who is at this point that is there in the crowd? It's not the higher class. It's not the people of means who would be with Caesar at bread and circus. It says that he went and healed them because they were sick. The truth is the early church, the earliest followers, the beginning of the movement of people following Christ was almost exclusively done by the poor. It was exclusively done by those who had not experienced abundance in their lives, probably in any way, who needed something, both real and tangible. Maybe they were sick, they were poor, they were hungry, whatever it was, but also needed something else. So this is the movement. These are the people who come. And so Jesus offers this incredibly different take on this whole idea, and yet is able to do something miraculous. He's able to give these people who have never experienced abundance an experience of abundance. And he doesn't do it because a dump truck of bread is, by the cartload dropped in the giant arena like a Caesar would do. He starts out with something simple and humble. In one version, we are told it's basically some young man's sack lunch. And by faith in God and faith in the people, is able to multiply that into an experience of abundance that the people around him have likely never seen or saw before. And it's not an abundance that comes from Caesar. It's not abundance that comes from the empire. It's abundance that comes from God. Now, I think if we were honest, we would probably experience something like this, Jesus multiplying the loaves and fishes, is kind of like a cute trick, right? It would get your attention, sure. But I don't think we would have the same response to it because we live in a time, in a place where most of us have the opportunity to experience this type of abundance whenever we want to. Now, that's not true for everybody. It's not that there aren't hungry people around us. It's not that there are people who don't go without. That is absolutely true. But the truth is we live in a time, honestly, that's why we work so hard with Hunger Heroes and the backpack meal program and all that kind of stuff, because we recognize there are some of our students in our schools that go home and they're hungry on the weekends. And that's not okay. And it's not okay because we recognize that as the exception. Right? We live in the world where not having enough to eat is the exception. In Jesus' time, not having enough to eat was the rule. So we look at that and go, obviously we need to overcome that exception, and obviously we do. That's good work that we do. But also we have to recognize most of us are used to living in a world of abundance, and so much so that we take it for granted up until we can't take it for granted anymore. And in case you need an example of that, I have one for you from, last fall. Yeah, somebody threatened our supply of toilet paper and we freaked out, right? My goodness. I do think it's funny that that's the thing we decided we couldn't live without. If that doesn't tell you everything about us, I don't know what does. But we did, and we took it seriously. And I do that. Honestly, we're all kind of guilty of it, because once it started, we were all like, how much do I have in my room? I don't know. Maybe I should get a little extra, right? And then we had plenty for a while, So, but that's true. And the problem was we lived in a world where we never assumed, never even thought that we couldn't just go down to the store and buy it, right? Until suddenly we couldn't. Right? That's an experience of abundance that we had taken for granted, and at least for a little while, we probably won't. And of course, we're dealing with those kind of situations, all the time. Good luck trying to buy a car right now. You're going to have a problem, and because we're used to just having everything at our fingertips. We are a people of abundance. All right, now I want to talk about, obviously, the next logical thing, which, of course, is to talk about the Statue of Liberty. So, it'll make sense, maybe. I don't know. If you remember, if you kind of had, like, the grade school understanding of history of the Statue of Liberty, it was a gift from the French, right, to the United States. And that's about as deep into the story as we get. And since none of us were there, I don't think, when it was dedicated 150 years ago. That I would assume when I heard that story, like it was a gift from like the French, meaning like the French government, to the American government, and it was supposed to happen sometime around our centennial, but like most government projects, it got delayed, so it didn't quite make it on time. Right? So about 10 years after the centennial is when it was finally dedicated in the harbor. That is the story that I always sort of assumed and somewhat heard about what was going on. Recently, though, I had the opportunity through one of the podcasts I was listening to where they were exploring the true story behind it. And the truth is, that actually the French government and the American government had basically nothing to do with it. at all. There was actually a French guy named Laboulaye who thought this up right around like 1865, thereabouts, and decided that he wanted to give a gift, knowing the centennial for America was going up, that he was going to do it. He wasn't a government official. He wasn't anything like that. He was just a guy. He had some means. He was not like a poor guy, but he was just a guy. And he decided he wanted to get together a bunch of people on the French side and a bunch of people on the American side. And the deal was basically the French would raise the money to build the statue and send it over, and America had to raise the money to build the pedestal to put it on, and so that we had a place to put it. Anyone want to guess which one costs more? The pedestal, yeah, the pedestal costs more by about like 20%. Anyway, yeah, so we got stuck with the check, whatever. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, and you're like, okay, that's nice. But this is a project for like millions of dollars. It costs millions of dollars in today's money to do this. And I really, the question that I had never asked, right? Because frankly, in my life, the Statue of Liberty has just sort of always been there, was why? Why on earth would this friend, like, why? I mean, thanks for remembering our birthday. Like, I mean, great. But turns out, as you might expect, there is a lot more to the story. So at the time when the French people, not the government, the people, were raising money to build the tower, build the Statue of Liberty and send it over, they did a couple of things. One is they built it in France first. So this is a picture of it actually being built in France. They built it completely there first and then sent it over, despite the fact that was probably a less efficient way to do it. But they wanted to do it because they wanted the French people to see it and know what was going on. And really, what this was, what the Statue of Liberty was to the French people, was an opportunity, kind of a sideways opportunity, to talk about what was going on in America. Because at the time they were raising most of the money and doing most of the initial work on the Statue of Liberty, France was actually being ruled by Napoleon III. And one of the things that Napoleon III did when he first came into power is he basically took away most of the freedom of the press, and then started his way down the line, taking away most of the freedoms that we would all take for granted today. And what Laboulaye and others were seeing was they were seeing their country, their world kind of head in one direction, and at the same time, we're watching the United States basically head in another direction. Laboulaye basically decided to do this after the Emancipation Proclamation came out. And what he saw was a country that was able to actually move more towards justice, more towards equality, more towards making sure that everybody who can has the opportunity to experience abundance. He looked at us and said, that's a country headed down the right path. We think we're maybe heading down the wrong path. And so he invented this whole really kind of scheme, not honestly to make a statue to give us to us for our birthday, even though that's nice. He basically made it as a scheme to find a way to talk and share with people the stories of what was happening, what he saw happening in the United States, in a way to hopefully inspire the French people to look to do something different. And in fact, the Statue of Liberty's official name is not the Statue of Liberty. The official name, still today, is of the actual sculpture, is Liberty Enlightening the World. That's what he saw in us, and that's what he wanted us to have, wanted us to be, and wanted us to share. And of course, there's the famous inscription on the Statue of Liberty that was part of actually a contest that was offered. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. And this was a time when that was truly who we were, and who we were trying to be. And he saw the trying, and he wanted his people to try in the same way. He saw that America was becoming a country of abundance, but becoming a country of abundance where we were at least trying. We weren't perfect at it then. We're still not perfect at it today. Don't get me wrong. But the goal the intention was to build a place where everybody had the opportunity to experience that abundance. no matter who you were and where you came from. Now, one of the ways that we know that there's additional meaning to this that is sometimes lost on us actually comes on the statue itself. Now, who's ever actually been to the Statue of Liberty in there? Yeah. So unfortunately, I was there like 2 months after 9/11, so they weren't letting you up in the statue itself, but we walked around the outside. And if you walk around the outside, you know that the base is actually taller than the statue, and when you look up, you can see most of Lady Liberty, but there's something that you can't see from the ground really all that well, and what you can't see from the ground is her feet. And because we can't see what's at her feet, we actually sometimes we can miss some important metaphor that was built in around her feet. Now, as it happens, we are a blessed community, and we have a Statue of Liberty about 2 blocks that way. That way. Anyway, so I went and took a picture. So around her feet, there you go. This is actually in front of Ledford Elementary. Around her feet is actually a broken chain. And the designer of the statue put that broken chain there on purpose to basically celebrate the idea that we not only were we unshackling the slaves, because that's what was happening at the time, but we were opening up who we were, and we were making sure that, again, everybody had the opportunities to experience the abundance that the world can offer to us. I wonder if Jesus were to come today, besides going to sit at the monkey table with all the bad kids like we talked about 2 weeks ago, I wonder if Jesus were to repeat this miracle today, what he would offer us. When most of us live in the world that we have access to all the bread we could possibly want and all the fish we can possibly want, even though I'm not a big fan of fish, it could be bread and cheeseburgers as far as I'm concerned. That'd be better. But since we live in a world where that is true, again, for most of us, I wonder what the miracle would look like today. What would Jesus want to take that we don't feel we have enough of and show us an abundance of? What would Jesus want to take that we don't feel we have enough of and show us an abundance of? And I'm not sure that it would be stuff, because I think most of us live in a world where we have plenty of stuff. I think if we think about the things we probably feel like we are missing, it's not going to be things at all. It's going to be something else. Because we also live in a world today that likes to tell us that we're missing things, and that, of course, that whoever's telling us that can sell us the answer. So all you got to do is look at, a lot of the ads that run today. So I got a couple examples. These were not hard to find on the internet, by the way. I like this one. We're like a cult, but with better Kool-Aid, advertising their margaritas. So obviously, alcohol is just going to solve all your problems, right? No, by the way, not. No. All right. So next one. You can never be too thin. Tastes as good as skinny feels. My God, who approved this ad? Right? Like, how did this get past anybody? Somebody printed this and hung this on like bus stops and stuff, and nobody stopped to think maybe this is not the right message we should be sending people? Really? All right. I'll get off my soapbox. No, I'm not. And then this one, Mother's Day, get back to the job that really matters, Mr. Clean. Oh, man, this would not work in my house. First off, I do a lot of the cleaning. Let me just say that. I assume it's like a mother and a daughter, and it's supposed to be like family time or, some nonsense like that. But my goodness, somebody didn't think that one through, right? So what do we learn from this, right? That that the only way apparently to escape our lives is through chemicals, or the idea that, your life's no good unless you're this skinny or this tall or this, fair-skinned or whatever. Or, if your house isn't this clean and your TV isn't this big, right? We live in a world where we get those messages all the time. So I think if Jesus were to come today and offer us an abundance of something, I don't think it would be stuff. I think the first thing that he would try to remind us of, tell us of, the abundance of, is the abundance of love. The abundance of love available to us. the idea that we are loved and lovable. We live in a world that wants to tell us that we're not. Jesus wants to tell us something different. I think Jesus would also want to come and just show us the abundance we already have and say, you are enough. I think he wants us to feel not inadequate, but adequate. Not because we're so amazing, but because the person whose image we are made in is. And I think if God were to come today and offer us abundance of something that we don't feel we have enough of, the other thing he'd probably offer us is some strength. Strength to get through the times, strength to get the hard times, strength to get through the busyness. And the great thing about all of this is what God, through Christ, has come to give us. It is what God, through Christ, has come to show us. It is what we come here for every Sunday to be reminded of. That we are loved. That we are enough. Not that any of us are perfect. I know most of you. I know you're not perfect. You know I'm not perfect. But that's not the point. The point is actually rather simple. The point is that when we become Christ's followers, when we love God, love neighbor, and love ourselves, then we are enough, and we have enough. And of course, because when we recognize that, we recognize that we are enough and that we have enough and that we are loved, it becomes really easy to look around and go, who are the ones not experience abundance the same way that I am? Who are the ones that need to experience it a little bit more? Yes, who are the hungry kids that we need to make sure have food on the weekends? Absolutely. But also, who are the ones that are hurting? Who are the ones that are missing? Who are the ones that need the grace and the peace and the love? And how do we show that to them as well? Because once we recognize we are all offered an abundance through Christ, an abundance of grace, an abundance of love, an abundance of peace, an abundance of acceptance, that the only barrier to any of that is us being open to receiving it. Once we recognize that, how can we not want to share that with one another? So at the end of the day, it's not really about loaves and fishes. It's about remembering where our abundance comes from. It doesn't come from the empire. It doesn't come from Caesar. It comes from God through Christ, because that's who we are, and that's who we are blessed to be. Amen.